Here we go with the first pack of Dragon's Maze. We are in a Dragon's Maze Gatecrash Return to Ravnica draft. And we have some sweet uncomes here. Putrefy, Tristani Summoner, and Ascended Lawmage. Putrefy and Tristani Summoner being particularly good in any kind of control deck. Well, Putrefy just being insane removal, and Tristani Summoner, a card that's very tough to deal with. If you're looking for the more aggressive options, there's Zerta Druid and Rubblebelt Maka that don't quite compete with Putrefy, but you could argue picking them over the other uncommons here. After the cards I just mentioned, I think the next best two cards are Crawl Warrior and Azorius Guildgate. So we are passing quite a lot of good green cards while first picking Putrefy, but we might not even end up heavily in green depending on how the packs look like. Okay, somebody took an uncommon out of this pack and is passing us another Putrefy, so that's a great start to our draft. There is Melek, which is a fun card, but not not as powerful as it might look like at first glance. Crawl Warrior, Vioshino First Blade, Runner's Bane, all solid cards, and an Orzhov Guildgate that we wouldn't mind tabling from this pack, even though that's quite unlikely. Once again, we are passing some of the more aggressive cards. Vioshino First Blade, definitely the headliner here, and Crawl Warrior, Rakdos Drake, Battering Krasis, the other options. Let's see if the Golgari cards keep flowing, otherwise we are going to have to see what we can do here. Azorius Guildgate and Orzhov Guildgate both in the pack work nicely with Ceruli Gatekeepers, of course, and those are probably the gatekeepers you want the most in your control decks, because gaining back 7 life is exactly what you want against the aggressive decks that do have problems to push through enough damage against 4 toughness creatures backed up by removal, especially instant removal like Putrefy. However, there is a punish the enemy in this pack, so I think we should jump onto red at this point. It's just much more powerful than the Gatekeepers or Hasda's Snare Squad, which I think are the best 2 cards in the pack next to the Guild Gates. So I'm going to look to cut red, green, and black from this point on, and most likely try to avoid being either blue or white from now on. That does mean that the Azorius Guild Gates we've seen aren't going to be interesting for us, but still we have a great start here. There's an Armed Dangerous, and we're just going to snatch that up. It's a great Gruul split card, and if it's fused, you often win the game on the spot. Also, there isn't really much to compete. We have Winddrake and Runner's Bane here, a second Runner's Bane we are passing, and then Dimir Guildgate is probably the next best card. Don't think we will wheel anything significant from this booster, but there is still the potential to get like one of these spells back. On the other hand, we are mainly looking for creatures after such a spell heavy start. Okay, here we have an Azorius Mythic that isn't all that great, and it certainly doesn't fit into our deck, so that's not really an option. And of course, on the Guildgate front, we would like to see the Guildgates that actually fix 2 of our current colors, because we don't know if we are going to end up in 3 colors or add either blue or white at this point. I think the best cards in the pack are Hasda's Snare Squad and Zerta Druid, and I think it's quite obvious that we should go with the Gruul card here rather than dip into a 4th color when it's not necessary. And the aggressive cards keep coming. Carnage Gladiator, very aggressive card, and I think one of the best aggressive uncommons, or definitely one of the best Rakdos uncommons in Dragon's Maze. I'm surprised to see this here. Decks with Carnage Gladiator can just be absolutely unstoppable. So when looking at our deck, we already have a lot of removal, and we have basically 0 aggressive cards. So I'm much more happy to take Rubblebelt Maka here rather than the Carnage Gladiator. That's not really all that great on defense. It does work, but it's just well, it is a lot of work. So I would rather have the Hill Giant that also has a nice ability in addition to that. I also don't want to pass too many Rubblebelt Makas, because people that might put people in Gruul, and I would actually have them in Rakdos rather in Rakdos to my left, because they aren't going to be picking Rakdos cards in the second pack for me to, well, for them to take them from me. Another relevant marker is a great sign that we should be in red, so no doubt about that. There's a Flux Charger, probably the other good card in this pack, and that's about it. Here we see an incredible late Spike Jester, also Nivik Cyclops, which is quite fine. Blaze Commando is reasonable in a Boros deck with a couple of burn spells, and we are definitely picking the uncommon here. I don't think it's wrong to first pick the Jester, depending on what's in the pack, and even though we might not be the most aggressive deck, this can still be a 3 power creature on defense, so very happy to see it. And now we could follow that up with a nice defender, 3-1 haster and then a 2-3 defender. It's definitely better than Drown in Filth, and I'm not looking to play Izzet Cluestone currently, so I'm just going to pick up playable here. Now things are slowing down. Morgue Burst might be a card that we could main deck or sideboard occasionally, so let's pick that up. And here it's worthy to note that all the none of the guild gates really tabled, so we are going to have to put a premium on Gruul guild gate in the next pack, and then Rakdos and Golgari guild gate following that. I actually think that Fido Burst is the only card that is really interesting for us, because Showstopper is just not really interesting, and Fido Burst might sometimes make the deck if our deck turns out to be more aggressive than it currently is, and we do have the double strike of Armed from Armed Dangerous, so giving +5/+5 is definitely not out of the question. Maze Rusher is only okay, so I'm going to take a clear path for the sideboard. And Weapon Search Table, that's a cool card to include. So now picking up some unplayables here, and I think we can be very happy about our cards so far. I think we have signaled well also, and we might be able to make this into a Gruul deck, splashing black for the Putrefies, but we can also just go for a straight 3-color approach depending on which cards we see. The difficult decision with this deck is how aggressive we want to take things, and currently I think we are in somewhat of a mid-range territory with the removal spells, but also very efficient creatures, some of them aggressive, and then great tricks like Armed Dangerous. And that means when we have to decide between Fire Fist Striker and Croconora, that I'm going to tend towards Croconora. It's just so much better in a mid-range deck than the very aggressive Fire Fist Striker, and I wouldn't mind picking up a couple of green cards to complement the red, and then only splashing black for the Putrefies, for example. Yeah, not much else in this pack, sadly, so when looking at what to table here, there isn't really much, and Death Card Rogue is kind of tough to cast when you are green, black, red. Next up we see a Ground Assault, so that's probably the pick. Bellstate Spy isn't really competing with that, and that's basically the cards we can play here. Shadow Size, of course, a theoretical option, but we already have a lot of removal, and adding to that just means that we won't have to fear anything our opponents do. And of course, Ground Assault only costing 2 mana, but scaling as the game progresses is very valuable for our strategy. There's a Gruul Keyrune, but with so many Gruul cards and so many good Gruul cards in the pack, I'm not going to go for the Keyrune, even though it's going to fix our mana. I hope that we can get some Guild Gates in the third pack. And if we are in Gruul and pick up a lot of playables in this pack, then we probably can afford to pick some of the Guild Gates higher than usual when Return to Ravnica gets open. So here I'm going with Zertar Swine. I think that a 5/4 is even better now compared to the previous Gatecrash only format, and we aren't relying on the super cheap creatures to get there. So I love the versatility, but also the body of Zertar Swine. Another Simic Guild Gate, so we really aren't seeing the Guild Gates that we would want to play. There is a Hellraiser Goblin, which isn't out of the question, but it's a touch too aggressive for my taste, for the deck we're trying to draft here. And that means that we probably have to settle for a Scorchwalker, even though That's not great. I'm not going to go for a Shadow Slice because, as I've said, I don't know how much black we are going to play, and it's very possible that we just don't have enough evasion for that. Here it's Skinbrand Goblin and Ghoul Guildgate. There's also a Spire Tracer, which is nice with the Blood Rush effects we have, but it's probably a little too aggressive for what we are trying to accomplish with this kind of deck. It's also not out of the question to wheel a card like Spire Tracer, but that remains to be seen. I think it's correct to take the Guildgate here. Skinbrand Goblin is very nice, but I definitely don't want to lose to mana troubles, so I think we can afford to pass the Goblin here. Next up, it's a pretty empty pack. Furious Resistance, Beacon Apparition and Riot Gear, all not that interesting. Smite is very good against us, and Ruination Worm is a card that we might just play. So I think we are picking the Ruination Worm, and we're going to hopefully keep in mind that our white opponents could very possibly have Smites to mess with our plans. Now, here we see some cards that are just okay. Towering Thunderfist, Bombarcore, Wildwood Rebirth are definitely all playable, but none of them are particularly exciting. Wildwood Rebirth does get a bit better, considering that we have a couple of Blood Rush cards. There's also an Orzhov Charm, which isn't castable for us, and an Alpha Authority. That's actually quite nice, giving a creature hexproof, but we don't have any particular combos with it, so don't think that we want to go that route. Just going to pick Bombarcore here because I think it's most likely that we are going to be lacking in 2-drops, and Wildwood Rebirth doesn't excite me too much. Next up, another Dimir Guildgate, so yeah, not really a lot of Guildgates to get, but another Zertar Swine is absolutely fine. Here, there's nothing for us, and I don't think that we are going to play Slate Street Ruffian or Beacon Apparition, so I'm going to take this Orzhov Guildgate out of the pack. And this is now pretty much it. We could pick Illness in the Ranks for the sideboard. I don't think that we are going to play a card like Mark for Death or Riot Gear. Hopefully we won't have to do that. So who knows? Illness in the Ranks, I've boarded it in before against token decks or the Call of the Nightwing. Gruul Keywound tabled, so that's definitely a good pickup. It's very, very good with the different Blood Rush cards we have, and accelerating into 5 mana is also quite interesting for us. Now, judging from how this draft went, it's actually quite surprising that we didn't pick up a single black card that we want to play in Gatecrash, because the Gruul options were just so good, and there were a lot of Gruul cards to choose from, which I guess makes sense considering that we cut our colors, but we did send a Zhorta Druid and some other Gruul cards to the left, so it wasn't at all clear what would happen. Now, we do need, I'm going to hide this Orzhov Guildgate, and now we need a plan on how to fill out our deck. We do have 2 Putrifies, and those are definitely 2 black cards that we want to play. Even Morkburst isn't bad, given that we have 2 Zertar Swines already, and a Scorchwalker to make this a pretty efficient spell. So now the problem becomes splashing black into our deck, and currently with 2 black cards we need about 3 black sources. Golgari Guildgate is a potential one, but there's also an Ultimate Prize and a Splatter Thug. So the Guildgate is competing for quite a high value here. I think that we have to go with Splatter Thug because it's just so powerful that we don't want to pass it, and it's also not black, so every good red-green card we take is going to make our mana so much better, which is also why I'm not considering Ultimate Prize here, as that would just force us to invest even more into our mana when we could just be picking good cards for our colors instead. So the primary strategy is going to be see how much red and green cards we can take, and then hopefully get a little bit of fixing for the Putrifies and see how that goes. So if we are going to be playing 17 lands, which is quite likely, then we probably want about 3 black sources, which we could also play a Transguild Promenade for, and so on. But for now, I'm just going to pick up the good red-green cards and then worry about the mana base later. There's also Seek the Horizon, but I don't think that's going to be necessary. And there is a Rakdos Guildgate, so given that we passed the Golgari Guildgate in the first pack, although that one might wheel, I'm going to take the Guildgate here. It is competing for Goblin Rally, but we don't have any Dino charges yet, and we are probably more interested in getting fatties down and letting them survive with the help of Blood Rush and our removal spells. So diluting our plan with all these little goblins, probably not even all that interesting for us. Next up, a pretty crazy Hellhole Flailer that's still in the pack. Golgari Decoy is very, very good, and so is Centaur's Herald, Splatter Thug, and Golgari Longlegs. All of them are easily playable for us. Common Bond, of course, also very good, but not a card we want to play here. I'm really torn at what to pick here. In my experience, Golgari Decoy is an absolutely amazing card, and we have exactly the deck for it. Looking for some late game action. It acts as a way to get through damage, but it also acts as a way to remove opposing creatures in combination with Blood Rush. And then you get the Scavenge in addition to make one of your creatures huge. I think I'm going with the Decoy here. Hellhole Flailer isn't really an option because of the splash. Splashing aggressive creatures isn't a good idea. I think closest would be the second Splatter Thug here rather than the Decoy. And the goods just keep flowing. Here we have the option between Brush Strider and Splatter Thug, with Centaur's Herald being another alternative, but I think the 3/3 Splatter Thug is better than investing 1 and 3 mana to get a 3/3 Centaur. And Brush Strider would be a nice, another nice 3-power 2-drop, especially because we might not be able to play Spike Jester looking at our mana. There's also the aforementioned Dino Charge, but when Splatter Thug and Brush Strider are competing in this deck, I think that we want the 3-drop because we are taking things a little more slowly anyway. Splatter Thug has great versatility in that it can just be a 2/2 first striking defender, or we can go on the offense and then our Blood Rush cards are going to be amazing. I think it's a somewhat close pick, but Splatter Thug is sufficiently good to take it over Brush Strider here. This is an explosive impact, just a 5 damage spell, and nothing competing with it. There's an Assassin Strike, which our mana doesn't support, and the same could be said of Spawn of Rixmadi, so I think we just have to settle for Rubbleback Rhino, and it's not unreasonable to play this card. I think that it has gotten a lot better now that games are a bit slower, and the hexproof really messes with some game plans. And now we are probably entering the phase where there isn't much for us left to take. There is a Gutter Snipe. That's definitely a playable card, and we might just have enough instants and sorceries in our deck to make it a worthy inclusion. And I don't want to play black or too many black sources to include cards like Spawn of Rixmadi when we already have 3 good 5-drop creatures and a Punish the Enemy. So who knows, maybe a Gutter Snipe is going to make it in. And Golgari Guildgate wheeled, so I'm very happy about that. Dino Charge and Growing Ranks also still in the pack, but this is exactly what we were looking to wheel here. I talked about Seek the Horizon, but don't think that's what you want to be doing. Our late game isn't remotely big enough to warrant such a card. I think Swift Justice is the card to be the most annoying, so I'm going to take that. Here we could take Dispel or Essence Backlash, as those could definitely be used against us, but it's probably more likely that the creature is just making another deck sufficiently better. I think it's just more unlikely that any of the other cards really show up, so who knows. Okay, this is just basically irrelevant. There's a Terrorist Worm which we won't play, and another one, and then we can get to deck building. Okay, let's see. This time I want to try something a little different, and I want to actually start with the mana we have available. So The interesting thing is that we have Gruul Keyrune and the 3 guild gates. There's also a Zerta Druid, which does generate mana, but it's kind of difficult to flood with the Zerta Druid in play because it has another relevant ability. So we don't have to worry about having too many mana sources, given that 2 of them actually have quite the board presence, and then we have just 3 guild gates to fix our mana. From the black cards, the most interesting ones are definitely Putrefy, which is pretty obvious, and then we have Spike Jester and Morgue Burst. So 2 removal spells, unconditional removal spells, an aggressive 2-drop, and then a late game 6-drop that gets back a creature of ours and then deals damage to creatures or players, which combines very nicely with the other burn we have, especially Explosive Impact, but also Punish the Enemy and Annihilating Fire to just take out opponents. So there's an argument to be made that this deck is actually a deck that wants the Morgue Burst, maybe more than any other 6-drop in our pool, in our drafted cards. So, well, we do have a Ruination Worm, but I think that Morgue Burst is probably the stronger option for us, with our potential to just burn out opponents. So the first thing to think about is the Spike Jester, because that kind of means we would have to play about 5 sources for 4 cards. Otherwise, if we don't play the Spike Jester, we would be fine running 4 sources for 3 cards. Now, this is the general rule of thumb, to play 1 more card that generates the mana than you have actual cards. The guild gates do mean that sometimes you have to wait for another turn until they get active, but Morgue Burst does cost 6, so the chance to have drawn the black source by then is quite high. And Putrefy also doesn't mind having to wait a little bit to still get some great value out of it. Now, in the case that we play 3 black cards and 4 black sources, we are going to have 2 swamps in our deck, and 4 black sources does sound like a lot, but it still leaves us with the potential to just play 15 lands that produce either red or green, or both in the case of Gruul Guildgate. So our danger of not being able to cast our spells because we've drawn too many swamps is actually very small. And it does mean that Zerta Druid is bad if we draw a swamp and a single other land, but drawing only 2 lands is pretty unlikely in a 17 land deck anyway, and then there is still the draw step to help you out. So I kind of like this setup. Having 2 swamps should still enable us to cast our double red spells and our red-green spells without much problems, and we should be able to support Putrefy, and Morgue Burst. Now I'm going to try to build the most control-ish, spell-heavy version of this deck, and I'm also looking at the Gutter Snipe to do some work for us, hopefully. Of course, Gutter Snipe and Blood Rush don't really synergize all that well, but looking at all these sweet instants we have, that's going to be quite fun, instants and sorceries. So this is already a nice start. We have Golgari Decoy and Croconaur here, and okay, I somehow messed up with the mana. We now have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as our curve. From the black cards we don't really want to play any, and we still have this Spike Jester here, but from our previous rule of thumb we would want to include another black source just to play it, and I'm not sure if it's worth it. Although it's a great card, and it might actually be worth making the mana a little less consistent, just to get out of the gates a little more quickly than we are currently planning to. So we can move all of these to the left. Higher Torturer isn't on the power level that we want. Clear Path and Bombercore are probably best off in the sideboard, although I could see an argument for Bombercore. Rubberback Rhino fits well into the overall strategy, which I already said, while drafting. And then this is pretty much what we are working with option-wise. And we are looking at 21 cards, so just adding another 2 cards would be sufficient. And when we look at our spells, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them trigger Gutter Snipe. So I think Gutter Snipe is feeling very welcome in this deck. Now, looking at our mana base from this perspective, we can already see that we actually don't have that many green cards. We have Armed Dangerous, which can be cast without green. We have Morgue Burst, which isn't green. And then we have basically 4 true Gruul cards and 5 cards that require green. So 9 cards with green requirements, but compared to 4 plus 10 or 11, so around 15 cards that require red, which does mean, in conjunction with the Annihilating Fire that we have, that we do want to play an additional red source anyway. And that's one way to phrase it. The other way to phrase it would be that we can actually afford to play 1 forest less, because we have no requirements that require us to have double green, except for Golgari Decoy's Scavenge ability. And Zerta Droid adds another green as well once we've drawn our first one. So that could mean that our deck is certainly set up to possibly include another Swamp. And then, okay, I clicked once too many. Then we have 5 black sources. We could include the Spike Jester, because it's just the better 2-drop compared to Bomber Core and the better creature compared to Ruination Worm, for example. Now, 6 lands are already in the deck, and we would have to play 11 more. Now, this is a red source, this is a green source, and this is both. And 7 more would... we have 6, and we need 11 more, which could be solved by adding 6 mountains and 5 forests. Now, that leaves us with 5 black sources, 9 red sources, 8 red sources, and 7 green sources. So, a mana base of 8, 7, 6, which doesn't sound too amazing, but I think it's doable. And I think our mana base with the 3 Guild Gates, the additional Key Rune, and the Zerta Druid should be fine. And I also don't think that we need 17 lands in this deck, because Blood Rush means it's going to be very difficult to be mana screwed. If we draw 3 lands, then we can do so many things with Scourge Walker, Rubabout Maka, and the Zerta Swines that our actual mana curve does look quite low. Comparably low. Now, the last inclusion, even though we only have 13 creatures, I feel like is either Bomber Core or Weapon Surge. Bomber Core isn't going to be great because we aren't going to be attacking with a lot of creatures, and Weapon Surge does require us having some creatures, but our whole game plan kind of revolves around just having creatures in play or doing stuff with our creatures. I also like it better than Fido Burst because Weapon Surge isn't as clearly of an aggressive card as Fido Burst. You can just cast Fido Burst and attack for an additional 5 damage, but we have a lot of effects that actually do that or do that better. Weapon Surge is a card that you can also hold back, do a huge block, and then overload for some great blowouts. It also makes our curve a little lighter in addition to what we have with another card that triggers Gutter Snipe. So now we just have to hope that the 3 Swamps don't come back to haunt us. It's entirely possible that we could play 18 lands in this deck rather than including a card like Weapon Surge, but I think that with the Druid and the Key Rune and a curve that's actually lower than it looks like, we are pretty well set up to win this draft. Let's see how it goes.